In an age where freezers fail, power goes out, and expiration dates are counted in days, the Amish still preserve meat using a technique so ancient, so reliable, that some claim it can last decades without spoiling. Cold, smoking, and curing. No electricity, no chemicals, just salt, smoke, time, and tradition. And yes, if done properly, some of these smoked meats have been known to last for 10 to even 30 years when kept in the right conditions. So, how is this even possible? It all begins with salt curing, the first and most critical step. Amish families take fresh meat, usually pork, like hams and bacon, sometimes beef or venison, and bury it in a mixture of coarse sea salt, sugar, and sometimes saltpeter, natural potassium nitrate. This dry mixture pulls out moisture from the meat over a period of several days or even weeks. Some families will weigh the meat down inside wooden barrels or crocks, flipping it every few days to ensure an even draw. During this phase, bacteria, fungi, and parasites are eliminated due to the high salt concentration and lack of moisture, essentially dehydrating the meat in a slow, controlled way. The Amish often follow old curing charts that date back generations, using exact salt weights, cut thickness, and ambient temperatures. They don't guess. They don't rush. And because they're not adding artificial preservatives or refrigerating anything, every step must be perfect. Once cured, the meat is washed to remove excess salt and sometimes soaked in cold water to rebalance flavor. But it's still not ready to eat. The next step is where the preservation magic really happens. Cold smoking, a slow, smoldering process that can take weeks or even months, and is done in specially built smokehouses. These smokehouses, found behind many Amish barns, are dark, timber-lined buildings with no electric fans or thermostats, just raw craftsmanship and airflow. At the bottom, a small, controlled fire is lit using hardwoods like hickory, oak, maple, or applewood. The fire burns low and slow, producing cool smoke that fills the chamber without cooking the meat. The goal isn't heat, it's penetration. Over time, the smoke seeps deep into the muscle fibers, infusing flavor while creating a protective barrier of phenols, acids, and aldehydes, all of which naturally inhibit bacterial growth and oxidation. The meat is hung from wooden racks or iron hooks high above the fire, sometimes 6 to 10 feet up. Airflow is carefully controlled by adjusting wooden slats or vents, and Amish men often monitor the smokehouse daily, sometimes even sleeping nearby during the coldest stretches of winter to keep the fire going. In Part 2, we'll look inside the smokehouse, how Amish families maintain the perfect conditions for long-term preservation, and why the smoke, timing, and air control can determine whether your meat lasts a month or 30 years. How the Amish smoke the meat and preserve it for decades. Once the salted meat is inside the smokehouse, the real art begins. The Amish have perfected the delicate science of smoke and time, often using no gauges, no timers, and no electric assistance, just generational knowledge and an uncanny intuition for heat, humidity, and airflow. Their ability to maintain these smokehouses over weeks or even months is what separates a ham that spoils in a year from one that can last decades. The smokehouse itself is usually a simple, timber-framed structure, no insulation, no windows, and minimal ventilation. Inside, thick wooden beams stretch across the ceiling to hang meat on iron hooks. Below, a small fire pit smolders almost continuously, burning hardwoods that create a clean, aromatic smoke. The Amish never use softwoods like pine or spruce because they produce sticky, resinous smoke that can ruin the meat and turn it bitter or rancid. This process is known as cold smoking, and it's vital to preserving meat for the long term. Unlike hot smoking, which cooks the meat and makes it ready to eat, Cold smoking operates at much lower temperatures, typically between 70 degrees Fahrenheit and 90 degrees Fahrenheit. This keeps the meat raw, but saturates it with smoke over many, many days. The goal isn't just flavor, it's transformation. The smoke contains phenols, creosote, and other natural preservatives that kill microbes and slow down fat oxidation. These chemical compounds, layered over time, create a kind of armor around the meat. Most Amish smokehouses run 12 to 24 hours per day, sometimes for several weeks straight, depending on the cut and the weather. The fire is fed manually with precise amounts of wood. Too much heat, and the meat sweats, leading to mold. Too little smoke, and bacteria creep in. Some families even use green wood shavings to keep the fire low and smoky without climbing into dangerous temperatures. Airflow is controlled with wooden flaps near the roof and hand-cut vents on the sides. The Amish understand that too much fresh air causes drafts that can dry the surface of the meat too quickly, trapping moisture inside and inviting spoilage. Too little, and the smoke becomes stale, bitter, or acidic. They find the balance by opening or closing vents by hand, often checking the air with just their nose and the way the smoke curls through the beams. This slow saturation creates what's known as a pellicle, a tacky, leathery surface layer on the meat that holds smoke better and prevents microbial contamination. How Amish store dried and smoked meat inside the root cellar. Once the meat has been carefully salt-cured and cold-smoked for weeks, the Amish still aren't done. What comes next is just as critical as the smoking itself, how the meat is stored afterward. Because without freezers or vacuum sealers, Amish families rely on methods that turn already preserved meat into something that can last for decades, in barns, pantries, or root cellars, with no electricity at all. The first rule of long-term meat storage is dryness. Moisture is the enemy of shelf-stable meat. After coming out of the smokehouse, the meat is left to hang and rest, often for several more weeks, in a well-ventilated, cool and dry area. This resting phase lets the residual smoke penetrate deeper and allows the outer layer to fully dry and harden into a natural casing. Amish farmers often say, "When the meat sweats, it spoils. When it dries, it lives." Once dried, the meat develops a hard rind or bark, a leathery, darkened shell that seals in the interior. At this point, the meat may be rubbed with additional dry salt, black pepper, or even wood ash, not for flavor, but to repel insects and moisture. Ash, especially from the same hardwood used in smoking, is alkaline and creates an environment where mold and bacteria can't grow. It's one of the oldest and most overlooked food preservation hacks, and the Amish still use it today. Some are stored in metal meat safes, hanging from hooks in the attic or cellar rafters. Others are simply hung in dry pantries or even barns, protected by screens, oilcloth, or wire cages. In ideal conditions, cool, dry, and dark, this meat doesn't just last months or years. It becomes shelf-stable for decades. There are verified accounts of Amish families slicing open a smoked ham after 20 years and finding it fully edible. The color might deepen. The flavor becomes intensely concentrated, but the meat is preserved, safe, and deeply nourishing. This shelf-stable quality isn't just about survival, it's about self-reliance. In a grid-down situation or during long winters or economic downturns, Amish families don't panic. They reach into the rafters, unwrap a smoked ham or slab of bacon, and bring it to the table like it was smoked last week. In Part 4, we'll explore how Amish families use this preserved meat in their everyday cooking, how they rehydrate it, flavor it, and stretch it to feed large families for weeks at a time. You'll also learn why their cooking methods make the most of every bite. How Amish cook the smoked meat and enrich the flavors to fullest. Once the smoked meat is cured, dried, and safely stored, Amish families begin the final and most rewarding step, using it carefully, sparingly, and with deep appreciation. In a culture where waste is nearly a sin and nothing is taken for granted, even a small chunk of smoked meat can stretch across multiple meals, feeding large families with bold flavor, protein, and tradition. When it's time to eat, the meat is trimmed and rehydrated, depending on the cut and how long it's been stored. If the meat has hardened over time, it's soaked overnight in cold water to soften the outer rind and rebalance the salt level. For something like a 10-year-old ham, this soaking process can take longer, up to 48 hours, changing the water several times to gently draw out excess salt without removing the flavor locked deep within. Once softened, the meat is boiled, simmered, or slow-baked, and often forms the base of hearty winter stews, bean pots, or soups. A single ham bone, smoked and aged for years, can flavor an entire pot of split peas or lentils for a dozen people. The fat renders down into rich broth, while the smoky meat pieces are shredded and added back in at the end. Amish cooks are masters of stretching protein. What would be one meal in a modern home becomes 5 or 6 in an Amish kitchen. Smoked bacon and jowls are sliced thin and used as seasoning rather than the main course. A bit of smoked pork fat is fried to render lard, which then flavors cornmeal, potatoes, or cabbage. Chopped bits are stirred into egg noodles or layered into baked dishes like scalloped potatoes. In this way, every ounce is used, nothing wasted, nothing thrown out. Even the bones and skin are saved. Bones are boiled again to make gelatin-rich broth, which is used to fortify soups or preserve other foods. Leftover smoked bits are minced and stuffed into dumplings or pastries. If something is truly too tough or aged to chew, it goes to the dogs or livestock, but almost never the trash. Because the meat is so intensely flavored from weeks of cold smoke, small portions are enough. A few slices can elevate an entire meal, and because it's not chemically preserved, it doesn't carry the heavy artificial aftertaste common in supermarket products. It's pure, it's potent, and it's respected. Amish children grow up learning how to cut, rehydrate, and cook smoked meat as part of daily life. There's no guesswork, no Google, just handed-down instruction and centuries-old recipes written on faded scraps of paper, or memorized through repetition.